Hey, I'm James from Smoking Head Barbecue, and today I'm ruining a brisket.
Oh, you're making your pastrami.
So sadly, Sarah is not wrong here. Every time I've tried to make pastrami or Montreal smoked meat, it's as if we went to the restaurant, saw a brisket on the menu and said, I'll have that, but can you make it worse? It's never turned out as good as what I get when I travel. I'm only a couple hours away from Montreal, about 6 hours, so I was often there for business travel as well as New York, and my home version just never has turned out as good as what you get in a great pastrami restaurant. But I think I got a plan on how we're going to turn that around. Okay, admission time. It's been over 2 years since I last tackled a pastrami. It left a bad taste in more ways than one. That's actually very accurate. On the brisket side of the camp though, I do anywhere from a few to over a dozen briskets a month. And in the 2 years since I last tackled pastrami, we've tried a whole bunch of new things that have been a game changer for brisket. Go back 2 years, I hadn't yet developed my double indirect method, which allows us to burn a cleaner, hotter fire. I hadn't tested the old rumor, the wives' tale of you don't need a water pan in a Kamado. I put that side by side since I have two, and I was blown away that these myths are sometimes just that. They're myths. They're not factually true. When you compare them objectively with data side by side, and more recently, I turned out a banger of a brisket using the DoJoe of all things, because with an aeronometer, I was able to measure a 4x air improvement out of my Kamado Joe, and I've been trying to do that and closing the gap to my offset. That's why I got it as a benchmark to really taste what I'm turning out, and the gap started off as really big, and we are getting into a range where I can get all the practicality, usability, versatility, and ease of use of a Kamado Joe and get closer to what I'm able to turn out on my offset. Now, if you say what I'm going to go through, James, you're throwing every accessory that Kamado Joe makes in here. This is way too complex. Just stick with the basics, whether it's your deflector stones or the slow roller. But if you're willing to go on a little bit of an adventure with me and try some new things, I think amazing results are in store. So let me tell you about the Joe Carroll method and what I'm frankly a little bit worried about inside of a Kamado style smoker, and what I've been thinking about on how to fix it. So my biggest concern with the feta style method is the temperature that they say they want to smoke the brisket at, which is about 18 hours at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now they went on to say it doesn't really matter, 205 to 225, that just works for the timing and the work back schedule of when they want their brisket to be done. But this takes me back nearly 15 years ago when I had a big green egg and I was trying to master holding temperatures because I read somewhere that Aaron Franklin said 225 is what you want to be smoking your brisket at. That's before I realized the temperatures in a Kamado versus an offset lead to completely different results, and I spent years trying to master this very difficult task of maintaining 205 to 225 degrees without a fire going out. Later on, I discovered there is a ton more flavor at higher temperatures. Not only is it easier to hold a temperature on your own and you don't need the assistance of a fan controller, the food tastes better. So this first obstacle of how are we going to get some flavor at 205 degrees is what I've been thinking about. And to give you a visual reference, I've set up my Kamado Joe Big Joe 1 with the Fireboard to drive my winner from my recent fan comparison. This is the one that I'm going to keep. If you want to find out why I think that versus the other three that I tested, I'll put a link down to that video below from a few weeks back. But I've set it up at a couple different temperatures. So the first one is 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Let that stabilize with the deflector stones, and when I open everything up, you can see this is what your fire looks like at 225 degrees Fahrenheit. You're just barely smoldering along with a couple coals. With the exact same temperature, I put everything back, but this time I'm going to set it up for my double indirect setup. Let it stabilize once again in the Fireboard app, so I'm getting a nice flat line at 225. Open it up and show you that you can see a little bit more active coal activity going on here, sort of reconfirming that we are burning more fuel, a nicer, cleaner fire, which tastes better. And so my game plan based off of those facts is to take the controller to help get a nice low temperature overnight, 205 degrees. But like I used last time, the DoJoe, which I measured at 4 times more airflow. And I think, as some of you pointed out in the comments, this is even understated because I was just holding the aeronometer out in front of a big open area. You'd really need to condense that down to a small measurable area to get the true benefit here. But using that, I know that it's at least 4 times better. And last time I didn't add a water pan. So I've got a couple ideas in store. Let's move over to the Big Joe Series 3. I'm going to show you how we're going to set up for what I hope is going to be my first amazing homemade pastrami using the feta style method. So let me show you what I'm thinking for today. So normally what I would like to do is place some wood chips, pellets, or even chunks in the bottom ash drawer, in this case the kick ash can. This is what I used in the first DoJoe video, and I was able to slide splits in there, and in a matter of seconds they would combust cleanly. But since my game plan is to do this overnight, and with the assistance of the fireboard, which is going to block access to this drawer, there's no way to get additional smoke wood into the bottom throughout our cook or use the ash drawer. So I'm going to load this up now, and at the end of the cook we'll check and see if any or all or none of what we add burns. And in the name of science, why not a couple wood chunks? These normally go no problem at 250 to 270. I'm not so sure about a lower temperature like 205 to 225, but that's what we're going to find out. So there we go. We've got our wood chips and our wood chunks. Drop that in. Charcoal basket. If you're just going to set up with a basic setup, you would use your deflector stones or soul wool or anything like that. But that's not what I'm doing today. Let me show you what I have in mind. So last time I used just the DoJoe without my divide and conquer rack. Today, since I have a spare set of deflector stones, I'm going to leave the divide and conquer rack in, drop in my X accessory ring. The DoJoe on my Series 3 fits above the top of this rack, no problem. So there's about a hand's width between the top rack and the bottom stones. That's not going to interfere, but leave that open so you can see down inside what that looks like. I have some spare deflector stones. Those are actually from my old large big green eggs. They're a bit smaller than the Big Joe size. A water pan. So this is going to allow me to get some moisture, a little bit of steam. Drop that in like that. And then this is where we'd stop be able to see, but the DoJoe, which has its own natural built-in double indirect right from Kamado Joe, where you've got your deflector stones, an air gap, and then our pizza stone. So that's giving us our double indirect setup. So I am doing this to be able to add the water pan, plus I know from doing that test with the fireboard as well as many other confirmed experiences that adding extra layers of deflectors promotes a cleaner burning fire. So even at a low temperature, like 205 degrees Fahrenheit, my hope is here we will be able to burn a hot enough fire. The only place the heat can come out is in these back 8 holes. So we've got 2 on the side here, 2 on the side here, and then 4 across the back. So all the heat's going to be coming out the back, pushed up over the dome, and pulled out the front where we got our 4 convection. So I know any humidity that I add is going to be going up and over passing our brisket. This is also nice and low, so it's not going to be hitting or interfering with any of the stones. And I hope even at a low temperature like 205 degrees, that's going to bump up the convection airflow. So now that you know how we have everything set up, let me take you back a week ago and show you how we prep our pastrami for today's smoke. Okay, I've just started to preheat our water. I think it's just off camera here, but I have our gallon of water aside. Early on, my first few pastramis, I followed this recipe and you bring the entire gallon up to sort of a boil, and we have a really hard time cooling that off. So by starting with 4 cups of water, we'll be able to incorporate our sugars and get those to completely dissolve into this 4 cups of water, stir it together, and I'm going to do the bare minimum for heat. So I want to avoid a full boil if I can, and just stir this until everything from our sugar ingredients, including the honey going in now, is fully incorporated, and that will be much easier to cool down the rest of our brining solution so we don't have to wait before adding our brisket, so we're not accidentally cooking it with too hot of a brine solution. So in just a few minutes, we have everything fully incorporated, our brown sugar, our honey, and our white sugar. So now I'm also going to dissolve our last few remaining ingredients, which is our pink curing salt, as well as our kosher salt. Gentle heat for another couple minutes until the salt is fully incorporated with the sugars. Okay, everything's fully incorporated. As you can tell, we're not boiling, but we're just getting a little bit of evaporation coming off. So now I'm going to turn off our induction top And we're gonna get to work on our next step, but before we do that, I've just brought out a little bit of ice. We don't really need to worry about diluting. We have plenty of salt and flavor, so we can get away with adding some ice, and that's just gonna help starting to cool down our sugar and salt mixture. Set that aside. Okay, I've already given our Dalstrong 8-quart pot a little bit of a preheat on my induction top. If you're following along at any oven, low to medium heat is fine. So next we want to toast our pickling spice. Sarah has written our ingredients, everything that we're using, and put it on the website, so I'll make sure to link to that below. But it has all the normal good stuff: fennel, allspice, peppers, you name it. There is a complete recipe on the website. So we're just going to let this toast on that low to medium heat until it starts to become fragrant. And then we're going to gently, not till there's color, sweat our onions as well as our garlic. And this whole process will be under 3 minutes. Again, we don't want to get color on the onions, just to start to sweat them. Okay, so that's just been a minute and I already have amazing aromas. The toasting process is really important. This helps sort of unlock the fragrance of our spices. These are spices. It's one of the reasons I love using fresh cracked pepper, is you get more flavor and aroma and spice out of those peppers. And by toasting them, we are just waking everything up. So now I'm going to add in our onions and garlic. And again, on low to medium heat, gently sweat these for just a few minutes. We're not looking for color, just till they start to sweat. So if you like brisket but hate trimming brisket, you are going to love today's trim, because we are doing absolutely nothing. We're going to remove this from the package, give it a quick pat dry, and transfer it to our container. That is it. In we go. This brisket is about 14.5 pounds. Transfer it into our container. Perfect. Those onions are smelling amazing. Let's move over there. You know that saying, when you're smelling meat, to make sure it's good, the nose knows? Well, unlike potentially smelling meat to see if it's good, the nose knows this is going to be amazing. So we are perfect where we want to be. So I'm going to kill the power, move this pot immediately off to a heat-proof pad, just so there's no residual heat coming from our induction top. Add in our sugar and salt, our gallon of water, and we are ready to add this to our brisket. All right, in we go. I just realized now I may have left the camera rolling while I'm mic'd up. I want you to know, this is not what it sounds like. I'm getting a little bit more ice water. Oh yeah, mic was totally on. So just have a little bit more ice water ready to go. Let's add our remaining ice water. And just in case our brisket starts to flow up, I'm going to crumple up some parchment paper, which is also going to get damp, and make sure that our surface of our brisket never is not in contact with our brine. All right, off to the refrigerator. Okay, I've removed our brisket and rinsed it off to remove the excess salt and our brine after sitting in that bath for a week, and it looks pretty fantastic. But I can't help but wonder if we've already ran into our first curveball. So while I was rinsing off the brisket, I set up DoJoe exactly as I showed you in my game plan, lit a fire, and put the fireboard to work with the settings of 205 degrees Fahrenheit. The fan is now off and the temperature is continuing to climb. Now I was able to hold 270 to about 300 degrees with a manual operation with the fan barely open, and I'm hoping here that my flaw is adding some smoking wood on top. Why I chose to do that, as I always say, put your wood at the bottom versus on the top, as you'll get one of two things. You'll get bad smoke because there's not enough exhaust for the smoke to exit, and so we get a bit of a creosote smell, or that wood will combust and shoot up our temperatures, which is what I hope is going on, is that some of those top pieces of wood, they got a little bit of heat in them, they combusted, and now I just need to wait for that to die out. But our temperatures have continued to climb up to 240 degrees. So game plan now is to get our rub on, and I'm gonna just let this stabilize a little bit longer before throwing it into our Kamado Joe. The game plan was, we're almost at 4 o'clock in Al's video, and Joe Carroll shared they'd use about an 18-hour estimated cook. That was going to take me to 10 a.m. tomorrow, and then I have an hour or two rest before lunch. So depending on how quick this slows down, or if it doesn't slow down, I might delay putting the brisket on a little bit past 4, just to make sure this isn't done at 2 or 3 in the morning or some unnatural hour just like that. But let's come nice and close. We'll get ready to put the rub on it. For the rub, I'm using the exact same one that Al shared in his recreation recipe, but I cut it in half. And as you can tell, at 50% of Al's recipe, this is going to be enough for several pastrami. So just keep that in mind. I'll post it on the website, the exact ingredients, if you want to make it at home. Let's get it on. So we'll just give this a good shake so our more granulated items don't all settle to the bottom. One other difference that I did from Al's video, he used a hammer to break up the coriander and peppercorns. I just put my pepper can into a more coarse setting for those ingredients, and you can see it's broken them down nice and easy without the need of a hammer, but you could do either one. So let's get this on. I'm going to start with the bottom side and finish fat cap up. Take it fast forward while we get our rub on. Nice and liberal, just like they did in the video. So now that this is ready, I'm just going to let it hang out on the counter until we start to settle down on our smoke temps. We'll get this on. I'll see you tomorrow with some updates. So remember all that talk about, I've got a plan, a stroke of genius going to solve all our problems. Yeah, well, about that. So after another hour and a half of waiting, the temperatures didn't come down. So the fireboard settled exactly where I had it in manual mode, which was, by the way, in manual mode, just open a crack, which I assume is the amount of air that can get in through the blower, as things were holding around 300 degrees Fahrenheit. This was fine when I wanted to do a brisket very quickly. So that brisket took 7 hours on the smoker, a couple hours to rest, and I was able to turn that out for dinner. But we don't want this until tomorrow. So plan B, all that genius talk, I remember it like it was, well, a few hours ago, because that's exactly when it was. So plan B, thankfully I have another Joe nearby, otherwise we'd have to shut down our fire, let things cool down, and try again. But since I have a spare, I fired up my Big Joe with the exact same idea. I put the wood chips in the bottom, a couple pieces of wood chunks to see if that will actually burn, added in some charcoal, started our fire, put in the deflector stones, and since I know for a fact, and confirmed it even earlier where we saw more than double these fire size with double indirect versus regular indirect holding the same temperature, my game plan here is to still aim for that low 205 degrees Fahrenheit, but set things up manually where the fan controller can actually pinch the airflow if need be. And since I know all of the 4 controllers that I tested can do this in a normal setting, even with a challenging temperature like 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 205 should be no problem. I think we just flow too much air. We solved one problem, increased our convection over 4x, but introduced a new one, which is apparently can't go anything lower than 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the game plan part 2. So now that that is all set up, we should be back to seeing you tomorrow in about 18 hours time. Gonna let this smoke. Fireboard has now taken over control, working its way back up to that 205 degrees that we want set. And fingers crossed, this is the last mid-cook update to come tell you about the fail in progress, but I think we've saved it. So I'll see you tomorrow. For me, it'll feel like tomorrow, but for you, it'll feel just like that. I feel like a grandparent who's going to explain a terrible drive in the snow, so I don't want to bore you with all the details, but we took an adventurous route to get to what looks like a really good looking destination. So early on in the cook, early in the morning, despite running a low temperature, using double indirect, I ran out of charcoal. When I was away, I thought I would leave things in control of the fireboard, and temperature started dropping, couldn't figure it out, bump up the fan. Came home and found that I was out of charcoal. So took the opportunity, and by the way, all of our smoking wood was gone. So I added some more charcoal, put our pastrami into a foil boat, and let it finish the cook. I also wanted to try, and there's gonna be some work here to play with this, but dialing down the temperatures, you know, sort of 20 degrees at a time, till I ended up all the way down to 105 degrees Fahrenheit on the fireboard, which was keeping our brisket at a resting temperature in the mid 140s. So really pleased with how that works. Obviously, we'll see if we need to make some adjustments to when we start dialing down to get that perfect tenderness, but so far, this looks pretty good. So let's come nice and close, slice into it, and see if this is perhaps the first good pastrami. Moment of truth, cut into it. Look at that. Nice rendered fat cap, juices galore. Don't want to squeeze those out. Nice pink color. I feel like this might be onto something. Little dry on the bottom. When you see that tearing on the bottom and we're getting this chunky stuff, that still means we are a little dry on the bottom. So that might be, I went to the boat this morning versus moving it in the middle of the night. So definitely an area for improvement down here on the bark. Also a week in the cure, we go from nice and pink to what looks like regular brisket deep inside. So maybe still a little room for improvement on our point end. Let's take a look at our flat. A little bit more even looking color throughout here. This looks promising. Get a couple slices. I'll come down a bit closer to the midpoint of our flat. Oh, that looks good. This is overcooked. That is so tender, it doesn't even want to hold up under its own weight. So we definitely need to start dialing the temperature of the hot hold sooner, because we have some carryover momentum, and as you can see, I'm not able to pick that up. So this is definitely room for improvement still on pastrami, but that looks really good. So let's dive in and see how it tastes. So I'm still hoping that this is not one of those looks good from afar, but far from good. But there were a few things that let us know that we've got a couple user error issues with our pastrami cook. Let's start with our flat. Grab a nice piece, including our fat cap. Fat cap render feels amazing. I just can't pick up an entire piece without it crumbling. Cheers. Oh, that part's good. Wow, so if we avoid the bottom, obviously we're not getting any of that dry parts. The fat cap render and flavor, that's phenomenal. Maybe let me take a little bit more of a pedestrian looking piece here, including top and bottom. Cheers. It's still really good. So that is a tale of two cities. So the top half of our slice, nice, tender, juicy. The fat cap, just an explosion of flavor. And then as I had to work through the bottom piece, this is like, okay, come on. This is taking a long time to chew through. That part is dry and chewy. So like we've got two completely different experiences in the same slice of our flat. Let's move over to our point end. Grab a piece that includes everything from top to bottom so we get the whole experience, see if it's any different in the point. So definitely overcooked. So all in one sentence, this, despite its obvious flaws, is the best pastrami I've ever done and one of the worst briskets that I've done this year. I'll save that for the DoJoe direct brisket, which didn't work at all. But this is not up to the standard of any of the briskets that I've turned out in the past year, where we don't have those issues around the tenderness on the bottom, but we normally go to the foil boat much earlier in that 165-degree temperature range, versus this was on the grill all night before moving into the boat and started to get a little bit dry and was already up into the 180 plus degree temperature range. So what an adventure. So on the brine and the rub, I'm going to give that a thumbs up. The feta sao method that was shared with my friend Al, and he put on his channel that we're trying and basing this off of today, there's a lot good there in terms of pastrami. In terms of the method, we originally tried to control the excess airflow of the DoJoe. That didn't work. Then making some plans and running out of fuel and a whole bunch of user errors, trying some new things at low temperature. That also needs to go back to the lab. That is not a copy and paste, but there's things that I'm encouraged here in terms of being able to hold a brisket at a low temperature. We talk about, that was one of the reasons that I wanted to get a control unit like the Fireboard and tested the 4 most popular options before picking that as the winner. That is definitely proving its use case. We just need to figure out when to turn the heat off and start having that die down in temperature in order to get that threshold right, so we're not overcooked and crumbly like we are here in our flat. That's it for today. More to come on getting this hot hold method inside the Kamado figured out, but that's for another time. I'm James from Soaking Head Barbecue signing off. Remember, don't be afraid to fire it up. These parts though, pure gold.